Hey everybody, how's it going? This is Candy, aka Brown Eyed Girl 69. I know my hair isn't the best today, but that's okay. I'm just going to be reading a book. We're on chapter 6 of the book Mr. Wolf and Me, and the title to this chapter is The Shadow of a Doubt. It was really dark and far too late by the time I fought my bike back from Sheriff's office and up the hill through the rain to home. Even without seeing Dad's car parked in the driveway, I would have known it was Friday night from the good smell pouring out of that kitchen. It was an Italian smell, but I couldn't tell exactly what. Let me guess, I said to Mom as I shut the door behind me and hopped onto the rug to drip. Let me guess, she mimicked crossly, turning to glare at me. You had an innocent errand downtown and were coming home at a decent time, but were kidnapped by a flying saucer? It wasn't a saucer at all, I corrected her, trying to keep my face serious. It was a flying ark, just like Noah's, except that the man in it was green with a long white beard. He bowed very low as he captured me. He warned me that as the waters rose to cover the earth, he had been sent to save the pure of heart and the children of really super cooks like you. Then I guess I'm lucky to see you at all, she said soberly. He smelled that Italian sauce and sent me home for my last meal, I told her, still breathing in that great smell of cheese and spice. It's lasagna, she said in a resigned tone, but I could see the grin twitching at the corners of her lips. You are driving me into an early grave with your late hours and your smart mouth. You will have it dug on a high hill, I hope, I called back from the closet. Then I remembered, did you say anything to Dad about Mr. Wolf and that dumb sheep farmer? She hesitated before replying. I thought we might let him catch his breath from that long drive home. In a way, I was relieved. Then again, I wished she had already told Dad so I wouldn't have to. When my stuff was all hung up, I went to the back room where we keep Mr. Wolf's rug, behind Dad's big lounge chair. Mom says the chair is too hideous to have out in the living room where Dad could really enjoy it. Mr. Wolf looked like a massive dark fur in the shadow of the recliner. How about it, fella? I whispered right down in his face. Feeling better yet? He raised his head a little, and I saw the gleam of white teeth. His breath against my face felt extra hot and smelled awful. Then I heard the reassuring drumming of his tail against the rug, and he'd lifted one paw to shake hands. I could tell that Dad had his breath back from his long drive home when I heard him come pounding down the stairs, singing that song about Cajuns going rolling along. He always sings military songs when he feels good. If you two want to sit down, I'll get dinner on the table, Mom called to him. Come on, Miles. Where is that kid anyway? Dad grinned at me as I slid into my chair. Let's hear about all that spectacular grades you've made this week while I was gone. Perhaps you shouldn't encourage him to exaggerate, Mom said slyly, trying to cut the lasagna into big squares. Great looping strands of melted cheese keep hanging from her knife, and the smell was to die over her. I'd lifted the first bite onto my fork to cool when the chimes from the front door sounded. Mom and I both jumped, and she got up so awkwardly that her knife clattered to the floor. Dad stared at the door she had gone through and back at me. What's up? Were you two expecting someone? I nodded. We meant to tell you first, I began. Then I didn't know what to say. Mr. Wolf, When I paused, Dad leaned forward with concern. Nothing has happened to him, has it, son? I just shook my head, not knowing how to answer. At the rumble of men's voices from the living room, Dad laid his napkin aside and got up. He waited while I dragged to my feet, and then, without even knowing what was going on, laid his arm across my shoulder as we went into the front room. Jordan Aggers looked more than a little out of place in Mom's neat living room. His clothes seemed even shabbier when they were wet. He had folded some sort of jacket into his hands, but he'd been hatless, and the rain trickled down from the ends of his hair. Standing there by Sheriff Craven's, he didn't look anything like as big and threatening as he had looked to me that day out in front of the general store. When Dad and the sheriff had shaken hands, Sheriff Craven started to introduce Jordan Eggers. Dad shook his head and didn't let him finish. Instead, he reached out and took the young man's hand in a hearty handshake. "I've known Jordan since he was a pup. How are you, son? And how is your ma getting along by now?" "Maybe a little better," Jordan Eggers replied as if he'd been caught off guard by Dad's tone. "And you're back here now, running the farm for her?" Dad asked. The young man's face twisted. "I'm trying to." He glanced at me with that cross look. Dad didn't leave the affairs in very good shape. "I'm trying to get Ma squared away with some income from that farm." Dad waved the two men to chairs while Mom kind of faded off into the kitchen to get some first aid to dinner. "Haven't been cued in yet," Dad said to Sheriff Cravens. "Miles said there was something about his dog. Young Eggers looked at the sheriff silently, and the sheriff squirmed in his chair. He was having as much trouble knowing how to start as I had back there at the table. "Well, Jordan here has been having a lot of trouble with dogs killing off his sheep," the sheriff began. Dad shook his head. "That same old problem. We've fought those roving wild dogs for years now, only to have people dump more strays and start it up again. But that can't have anything to do with Mr. Wolf." Jordan was twisting his hands in the jacket on his lap. He looked scared and nervous. I would have felt sorry for him, only I felt scared and nervous too, and I wanted the whole thing over just so he'd go away. "Just let me tell you what's been going on," Jordan Eggers began. "All this started during the first lambing after my father was buried. Dogs hit the flock and killed 2 lambs and wounded one of the ewes I had bad. I put up the bright outside lights and tightened the fence with double barbed wire strung around the top. When I lost another lamb just about a week later, I took to standing guard. It was some time in late April before I ever saw the pack in action. I was drowsing when they came, but I woke up enough to try to fight back. There was a big black dog in the pack and this shepherd-looking dog. That didn't look like any mongrel dog to me. It was marked with silver and black, just like that dog your boy has. I winged the shepherd and thought I had killed it for sure, even though it dragged away into the woods fast. By the time I got the rest of them driven away and went to look for the shepherd, it was gone. I figured it had just made it back up into the hills to die." Dad started to speak, but Jordan didn't wait for him. "After that, I kept a really careful watch at night. The next time they came, I killed the black dog, and there was no sign of the shepherd in the pack. It was peaceful then for the whole summer. I figured that I'd either broken up the pack or they'd found somebody else to steal from. That was it until last Thursday night. I'd even quit staying out there. Instead, I bought a guard dog and felt pretty secure. That was a mistake because Thursday the whole pack came." "And you saw them?" Dad asked. Jordan Eggers nodded. "I was hammering away at some stalls in the barn when Ma came in hollering the dogs was its lambs again. If I had had my gun, I might have shot 2 or 3 of them. As it was, I yelled for Ma to go after it while I tried to close in on them with a piece of stove wood in my hand. The rest of them ran off, but this one big German, he was gripping my guard dog and shaking the life out of him. When I went for him, the German let go of my dog and stood me off. It was a real shock to see him. I was that sure I'd killed him that time before," Jordan went on. "But there he was, bigger and stronger than he had looked at the first time. There was no way I could get near enough with only that stove wood, but I kept threatening, and he finally turned and took off, leaving my dog half dead and 5 lambs besides." Jordan looked up at my dad, but this time it was my dad who waited. "Ma called Doc Fletcher. He had to wait a spell before coming, and Ma and I tore sheets and took care of the animals best we could till he got there. It was a while he was sewing up our dog that he told us about sewing up that dog of yours, not 10 minutes before. It was clear that nobody was going to break that silence but me. The room was so full of eyes that my throat nearly swelled shut. My dad prodded me. Miles. Mr. Wolf bought a groundhog, I told him. My voice sounded weak and funny. We were out on Pin Hill gathering nuts when he got into a fight with this big groundhog. Doc Fletcher said he'd never saw wounds like that on such a big dog from any varmint. Jordan Agers challenged. It was the biggest one I ever saw, Dad, with long yellow teeth and claws like talons. Did you save the carcass? Dad asked quietly. Sheriff Cravens cleared his throat and crossed his legs the other way. We went out there in the rain today, he said, Miles and me. We found a clearing that showed there'd been a fight of some kind. There was even blood on the grass, and Miles found a stick he said he used to pry the animals apart. But there wasn't any carcass there. I'm not out to make trouble for your boy or you, Jordan Agers said to Dad, but Ma hasn't gotten a thing in this world but me and that little parcel of stony ground out there. First time I saw that kid's dog, I was struck by how much it marked like the shepherd I'd shot out at my place. When I saw the dog Thursday night again, I knew it was the same dog with no mistake. But Mr. Wolf was with me all the time, I said desperately. Can you describe the dog you drove away from your dog in the flock? Dad asked. Jordan Agers nodded firmly. He's big and looks purebred. He's got that black and silvery coat. None of that tan and brownish look a lot of those dogs have. Dad looked straight at me. Call Mr. Wolf, he said firmly. I started to get up, but Dad motioned me back. Just call him, he repeated. I called and whistled, and we could all hear the laborious struggle Mr. Wolf made getting to his feet. Come on, boy, come on, I coaxed. We heard his uneven progress along the hall, and then he was standing in the doorway. He was carrying his head low from the pain of the stitches, and his ears were down. Maybe if you didn't know him like I did, you might have thought he even looked mean. But the lamplight gleamed on that sleek sable and silver coat of his as he looked questioningly at me before crossing the room to lay his head on my knee. Jordan Agers nodded. That's him, he said firmly. That's the same dog, without a shadow of a doubt. And the next chapter is called House Arrest.